DK Metcalf traded. What does this mean for his dynasty value and Jaxon Smith-Njigba's? We'll tell you on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to talk about a flurry of moves in the NFL. But just off the top, we are recording this at 11 a.m. Eastern time, about an hour before legal tampering, oxymoron, starts in the NFL. So there's going to be a ton of moves that are going to happen that we're just not going to talk about on today's show. We'll cover them on Tuesday. But we had a bunch of stuff that happened on Saturday and Sunday, Kate, that we wanted to get to. And let's start with your Pittsburgh Steelers, who traded for DK Metcalf, sending a second-round pick to Seattle and giving Metcalf a new 5-year deal. What does this mean for Metcalf's dynasty value? And again, we don't know who the quarterback is yet.
We don't know the quarterback, and that's kind of the craziest part. I think this is probably, in recent memory, one of the craziest moves the Steelers have ever made. This was a very uncharacteristic move of the Steelers, not just to, make a splash. I think people have been waiting for the splash move. We thought it would be Brandon Ayuk. It wasn't. But to not just make the move for a star wide receiver, but then to pay him what is the highest total value contract for a wide receiver in NFL history. It's a 5-year deal, $30 million per year average. That tells you something about the investment, right? Like, that's not chump change, especially for a team that historically does not pay players from the outside. They pay their own players, right? The contract last year for, Patrick Queen was the largest free agency contract an outsider in Pittsburgh had ever received. This is like just as absolutely wild. So it tells you about the commitment level. It tells you that they're planning to make him a feature cornerstone of the offense. But Marcus, I think there's a second component, not just the quarterback, that makes this a bigger question mark than ever. And that's what is going to happen to George Pickens. There's still a shoe that needs to drop, I think, before we're going to have a grasp on the true value of DK Metcalf in Dynasty.
See, I'm of the belief that I think Pittsburgh's going to keep George Pickens because...
Really? Okay. Can you explain that? Because it does feel like the sentiment, the rumblings, we'll say the rumblings have indicated a potential that this move may indicate that the team's looking to move on. And obviously there's not been a perfect tenure. George Pickens' his play on the field, we've seen the upside, no doubt. But, tell us why you don't think this move necessarily means it's time for George Pickens to go.
Because I don't think Pittsburgh is going to be able to get enough in a trade to make it worth their while. Pickens was somebody who had first-round talent that fell to the middle of the second round. Go back and read some of the pre-draft news and rumblings. There were several teams that had George Pickens just completely off their draft board. And I can't imagine anything that's happened in the last 3 years is going to change the opinions of people around the league. So I think if Pittsburgh were to trade him, you're looking at a day 3 pick. Maybe a 4th rounder, maybe that's the ceiling. And if you're Pittsburgh and you're trying to win now because, this is a team that hasn't won a playoff game in 8 years, I would just rather have 1 year of George Pickens than a 4th round pick in a relatively weak draft. And, obviously Pickens would be a free agent next year. I think the idea of having Metcalf and Pickens for at least 1 year with probably a veteran quarterback would be fun. But I also think that would significantly hurt the dynasty value of Metcalf and Pickens. But if I had to bet today, I think that's what ends up happening.
And I think part of that may be loss in value. I mean, again, you can't discount the fact that, the quarterback is a massive problem. Now, there have been reports that, most likely it seems Justin Fields probably not going to be back. It sounds like he's going to test the free agent market. And I just don't think that the Steelers at this point are going to want to match maybe what a New York Jets, who have been kind of rumored to be really locked into Fields. Like, I think he's going to get more money elsewhere, and the Steelers are probably going to be fine letting him move on. But the other options, Russell Wilson, which, you know, we kind of know his rapport, his history with DK Metcalf. The two of them are close. Reportedly, like, the move for DK Metcalf had no real correlation with their plans, you know, for Russell Wilson, but still worth noting. I think that would be a great fit because we know that what DK Metcalf does so well is, you know, the big power plays down the field. You have George Pickens on the opposite side of him with a very similar skill set. You're not going to be able to assign 2-3 defenders to just guard DK Metcalf. So as long as you're a quarterback capable of a deep ball passing along the perimeter, I think we're going to be okay.
My biggest takeaway from this move, I'm not buying DK Metcalf. He'll be 28 during the season. I think we've already kind of seen like the apex of Metcalf's career. Still think he can be a good fantasy receiver. I think Pickens is somebody that is very volatile up and down. And I think his dynasty value dropped now that we know that he's not going to be getting a long-term extension in Pittsburgh. The most interesting thing for me, Kate, is Jaxon Smith-Njigba in Seattle now because Metcalf is gone. Tyler Lockett was released over the weekend. Now we'll get to Geno Smith being traded in a second. Well, I'm not quite sure what Seattle's going to do at quarterback. We'll probably have news by the end of today. But I'm looking at Jaxon Smith-Njigba and wondering, okay, is this somebody that we should be ranking as a top 12, top 14 dynasty receiver? Because his main competition for targets went away. And you look at the rest of the receivers on this roster, like Jake Bobo and some other day 3 undrafted guys. Like, I think there's a chance JSN just leads the NFL in targets next year.
I think there's absolutely a great chance that that actually ends up being the case. Now, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, for a guy who we're kind of talking about, I think in not such a glowing fashion, let's not forget he was the 20th overall pick in the 2023 draft, didn't have a stellar necessarily, rookie season, 628 yards, 4 touchdowns. Still not terrible. But again, we're in the era of being #spoiled. But coming off a campaign where he posted 100 receptions, 1,130 receiving yards, 6 scores, wide receiver 17 in terms of fantasy points per game. And you're telling me that that target rate could go up significantly?
Yep.
He already ranked 12th in targets last year. I think very quietly led the league in slot snaps, ranked 6th in routes run. Like, this is a player that I think has immense upside, already has kind of proven that upside in a big way. And yeah, he's got all the opportunity in the world to, prove himself. I love it.
One of the things that we were saying even early last year is that they need to change this offense. They need to start funneling the targets through through JSN and let Metcalf just be the guy that gets 5-6 deep targets a game, but make JSN your chain mover and the guy that's the focal point of your passing offense. Now that Metcalf is gone, they have no choice, right? It's going to be JSN. And I think they're going to make sure that they find different ways to get him the football. So I'm looking at some receivers like, let me give you an example. Would you rather have JSN or Ladd McConkey moving forward?
JSN.
So you're already talking about a top 12 receiver in Dynasty. And I think that's what's so interesting to me is that we went from one trade from JSN being a borderline top 20 guy to now he's comfortably a top 12 Dynasty receiver.
I mean, looking at the free agent market, okay, let's consider some of the options that maybe they're going to have along the outside here. Like, it's not a great free agency group at the wide receiver position. There are some names that, like, okay, they have veteran status. They might be relatively affordable. I'm thinking of guys like Darius Slayton, right? Like, that seems like a name that, could be in the mix. Brandon Cooks.
And they'll make a move like that. Like, they're not going into the season with Jake Bobo as one of their outside receivers. But I think the point is it's not DK Metcalf and it's not Tyler Lockett, right?
No, that's definitely the point. And yeah, I absolutely think from a standpoint of target share, we're looking at, JSN as, like you said, a potential target leader here in the 2025 season. But also, let's just look at the skill set that brought him to the NFL as a first round pick. He was in Ohio State's system alongside a wealth of talent. I mean, wide receiver factory 101, it's LSU and OSU is right behind them. Like,
Yeah.
this is a first round wide receiver factory. And there was a point that we had JSN on the field and he was the best wide receiver among all of them. So this isn't just kind of a product of volume. I'm also looking at the player that I evaluated coming out of the 2023 draft and saying he had the first round talent. He was a standout wide receiver with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Emeka Buket. Like, this was a very talented group of wide receivers, and he stood out in a big way. All signs point to JSN being the true dynasty value that he's appearing to be right now.
JSN to the freaking moon. Let's go. All right, let's talk about Geno Smith, JSN's former quarterback, now landing with the Raiders. We'll talk about his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Kate, we got some big news on Saturday. The Raiders got their quarterback after wondering forever who was going to be their quarterback, Geno Smith. Now, I don't think Geno Smith has a ton of dynasty value unless you're in super flex leagues, and then I think he's a borderline QB2. But what I care more about is, how do you think this impacts the skill players of the Raiders moving forward?
I really like this move for the floor of these players in particular. Now, Geno Smith, I don't necessarily know that he's a ceiling guy, right? But what I do think you know exactly what you're going to get out of him is a pretty safe floor as a passer. And despite the fact that, 2024 was a year where maybe we saw what felt like a little regression from Geno Smith, he still had a pretty outstanding campaign. 4,300 passing yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, 21 touchdowns. Saw an uptick in terms of his interceptions. Let's not forget, though, we had a new offensive coordinator come in. This was like the first year of a kind of new regime for this system. It was a Pete Carroll-less year. Now Geno Smith returns to the same, head coach and I think, kind of underrated, generally speaking, skill position player group that could be kind of a nice fit in general. And I think they're going to get some stability in terms of like the accuracy of the footballs they're going to be receiving. And that's going to be a good thing all around, especially for those who went all in on Brock Bowers as tight end 1 in this class. I'm talking to you, Marcus Mosher.
So I don't think this changes really much, if anything, for Brock Bowers. I just think it gives him a little bit higher of a floor. But I guess to me, like, it makes some of the guys that are down on the roster a little bit more interesting. Like, I think Jacoby Myers is one. I think Myers is a wide receiver 3, right? But even someone like Trey Tucker, who I've been kind of high on. Trey Tucker, over the last 2 years, he was a 3rd-round pick in 2023. He's played with Jimmy Garoppolo, Brian Hoyer. These are all guys that have started games for the Raiders. Jimmy Garoppolo, Brian Hoyer, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, Desmond Ridder. Like, just an awful quarterback room. And Geno is going to be so much better than all of those guys combined. Yes, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen. But it just gives the Raiders a competent quarterback. So now I do think somebody like Jacoby Myers, I think you feel comfortable starting every single week moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to give you the same type of playmaking and fancy plays. No, that's not Geno Smith. But he did rank 11th in terms of accurate throw percentage among all quarterbacks with 100 plus attempts in 2024 per PFF. And I think that's the best possible representation of what you're going to get. In terms of uncatchable inaccurate pass rate, 5th lowest among that same quarterback class, behind Joe Burrow, Tua, Russell Wilson, and Jared Goff. Geno Smith, like I said, 5th lowest uncatchable inaccurate pass rate through the 2024 season per PFF. Again, that just speaks to, I think, the floor that you are going to get. Brock Bowers, already a guy that I think, you can generate maybe some of those layup touches for across the middle of the 100%. Field. He can generate that separation, but probably the boundary is where, you're going to get a bigger upgrade. Do you envision, though, that this team is done making moves in terms of the wide receiver? Because I do think they're going to get
somebody.
They're going to get somebody else. It's not just going to be Trey Tucker on the boundary.
No, it'll be somebody, whether it's, you mentioned Darius Slayton in the previous segment. Maybe they go back after Amari Cooper, who was with the Raiders to start his career. Like, there'll be somebody else that we know on the outside, but nothing to scare you off from drafting Bowers or scare you off from taking a shot at Trey Tucker or Jacoby Meyer. So I agree with you there. It's an offense that's very much in flux, but I like the way they're at least trending now with a competent quarterback, a competent coach, an exciting offensive coordinator, and Chip Kelly. It's one to watch.
Exciting minority team owner who I have to imagine is playing a part in some of these moves. This feels like a different Raiders organization. And we've kind of talked about, obviously dynasty fantasy football, kind of mirroring a stock market like theme, buy low, sell high. The Raiders with Tom Brady, I know they're not overly exciting yet. I don't think the Geno Smith trade really moves the needle for a ton of people, but this is an offense that, whenever we figure out the running back situation, I wouldn't rule Najee Harris out as a potential fit there, especially with the signing of, Aaron Jones re-signing with the Vikings. Like, that felt like a potential fit. I do think that whatever players are in this system, I'm generally going to want to buy low on, because, again, not the sexiest team. The Raiders aren't super sexy in general, but I do think they've put a lot of building blocks in terms of the stability of the organization, that this is just generally a buy low team for me that I could see trending up significantly over the 2025-2026 seasons.
I want to ask you really quickly about a former Raiders receiver. How's that for a transition? Davante Adams, who signed with the Rams on Sunday night to be the number 2 receiver. Everybody believes that they're going to move on from Cooper Kupp, whether that's through a cut or through a trade. I don't know if Davante moves the needle a ton, but what do you think about Adams on a 2-year deal with the Rams?
I love this fit. We talked about Davante Adams a little bit last week on our show with Matt Williamson, and I mentioned the most intriguing part of Adams for me, which was the usage we saw with the New York Jets. He played a lot of snaps out of the slot last year, a career high snap usage rate out of the slot. And we actually saw when he was with the New York Jets, he was generally more efficient than we'd seen in comparison to his career averages. I think a big part of that was the creativity to use him out of the slot as opposed to a primary boundary receiver. Use that ability as a mismatch up against some of these linebackers to create some space, create a little bit of separation that maybe he's not as able to create out on the boundary. We know he has, plenty of play strength. I think that was kind of a cheat code for him a little bit in the second half of 2024. And you mentioned the likeliness of Cooper Kupp moving on. If we swap out a Cooper Kupp for a Davante Adams, I think that's a big upgrade, at least at this point in their respective careers.
Yeah, and I think he's like the perfect number 2 receiver because he can get open. He can beat single coverage. He's somebody that I'll actually buy in my dynasty leagues. Like, if I just need a wide receiver 3 with Matt Stafford throwing him the ball, I think you can get some good production. So, of all the possible landing spots for Adams, I think this is one of the best. So good for Adams for getting in a favorable situation. All right, Kate, we've got some running back news over the weekend that I wanted to touch on, including Aaron Jones signing a new 2-year deal. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets. I love March Madness. It's one of my favorite times of the year. I've got a couple TVs in my basement. I'll throw them on, watch the games. And now you can bet on FanDuel. You can use the FanDuel app. It's so easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. This is a great time to sign up for FanDuel. So go visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Kate, this is not a great free agent running back class. It's not Saquon Barkley. It's not Josh Jacobs. I don't even know if we have definitely don't have a Derrick Henry. Might not even have a DeAndre Swift, but we did see Aaron Jones re-sign with the Vikings on a 2-year, $20 million deal. I think this takes him out of the running back conversation early in the draft. How are we feeling about Aaron Jones going into the 2025 season?
Oh, I absolutely love this. And I still think that Aaron Jones, definitely probably one of the guys that people aren't as excited about, especially because of his age. He's 30 years old. So we know that age is a number that we especially care about at the running back position. But hey, Aaron Jones, I think his overall game hasn't aged all that poorly. And I think people are a little hung up on that number. But let's look at what he did in the 2024 season, ranked 13th in snap share. Also dealt with some injuries in 2024. So let's not forget that. Ranked 9th in red zone touches, 8th in targets, 9th in carries, 9th in rushing yards. This was a top 10 running back in the 2024 season. RB20 in terms of fantasy points per game. But when you look at that opportunity in the Kevin O'Connell offense, that was really, I think, generally pretty hard to beat. I love this fit. I love that he's remaining in the team that, was able to continue to maximize some of that efficiency. And Aaron Jones is a guy that I'm probably going to be trading for on a lot of teams that I consider myself competitive in this year.
Well, we also, again, we're recording this about a half an hour before the legal tampering period starts. It doesn't seem like Sam Darnold's going to be back, which means it's going to be J.J. McCarthy starting at quarterback. And while we really like J.J. McCarthy, he's coming off a major knee injury. He didn't play at all. So it's a first-year quarterback. I've got to imagine that the Vikings are going to try to be a little bit more balanced maybe than they were last year, which just means a ton of touches for Aaron Jones and coming. I do think they'll probably draft a running back at some point this year, but it's not going to be in round 1, and I have my doubts it'll even be in round 2. So this makes Aaron Jones like the perfect RB2 candidate to go out and get and rent for a year or two. His value is not going to be super high because he's a 30-year-old running back, as you mentioned, Kate, but he's going to give you top 15 production on a week-by-week basis. I think he's a perfect guy to go out and target in your trades right now.
Yeah, and again, I want to emphasize so much. He didn't have that perfect level of efficiency. By Aaron Jones's standards, 2024 can be considered almost a disastrous campaign, but still, an efficient running back who was able to get the job done. Only had, 5 touchdowns. Fumbling was a little bit of an issue for him last year, but I also just want to go back and stress some of the injuries that just kind of plagued him. It was kind of one after the other in the 2024 season. Hip injury, week 5, rib injury in week 10, quad injury, week 17. This is a dude that I don't really think ever had the opportunity to get to 100% throughout the season. I still think watching him play, you saw flashes that he's still Aaron Jones. So yeah, this is a guy that based on the offense and opportunity, I'm perfectly willing to go in on, especially considering the financial investment. Clearly, this is an organization that doesn't believe that, maybe some of the efficiency that he lost due to injury is gone for good.
Now, this is a Steeler podcast. We've already talked about Metcalf. So I at least have to ask you about Jaylen Warren, who got the second round tender this morning. That's going to pay him about $5 million if Pittsburgh doesn't agree to a long-term contract. Again, half an hour before free agency. So maybe Najee Harris comes back. I have my doubts, but
No.
if Najee does leave and it's Jaylen Warren in this backfield, I think one of the things that's really interesting, Kate, is that, again, Pittsburgh traded away their second round pick, which to me, I thought that was a spot that you could like circle a running back. I have my doubts that they're going to take a round 1 running back. And if it's a round 3 running back, you're talking about somebody that's going to come in and split snaps. But what's your read on the Jaylen Warren situation going into this offseason?
I might just like, maybe I'm, not correct. Maybe, I don't know, but I still don't think that Jaylen Warren is an RB1 in the NFL. And I think
agree.
he is a top tier complementary running back, but I don't think Jaylen Warren is the type of running back that Pittsburgh's going to trust to give 20 plus touches per game on an every week basis. We know what type of offense they want to run under Arthur Smith. They want to run the football. And I just don't think that Jaylen Warren is necessarily the guy. So if I have like a very short window where I can maximize on maybe selling my league mates the idea that Jaylen Warren could be the RB1 in this offense, I like that because we've talked about the depth of the running back position in this draft class. I don't necessarily think you have to have a first, second round running back to make a huge difference. And then, obviously there's always the potential of trading up into the second round from the third, but there's a decent number of, running backs. Let's say Caleb Johnson, a guy who I feel like, has fallen a little bit in the pre-draft process coming out of the combine. Caleb Johnson is a player that reminded me a lot of a more explosive Najee Harris, who very much could be available in a range that's attainable to Pittsburgh. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop here because I just don't think Warren's the long-term answer. But I do think he's a player that Pittsburgh really likes, and he is a player that probably isn't going to command more than that, $5 million plus contract that Pittsburgh's earning him this year.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh's in on some of the other running backs like Rico Dowdle, who I think his skill set meshes well with Jaylen Warren. I just don't think they're going to pay big money for Najee. Could Pittsburgh be a spot for like Omari and Hampton in round 1? I think it's possible. I think it's also possible Pittsburgh trades down and maybe that gives them some more ammunition. So I think you and I are in agreement. Like, this is not going to be Jaylen Warren's backfield by himself this year. It's just not going to happen. He can't stay healthy. He's got fumbling problems, and he's not that big. Generally, we see Arthur Smith wanting big running backs, whether it was Derrick Henry in Tennessee, Tyler Algier in Atlanta for that 1 year where he put up big numbers than Bijan Robinson. Like, I think they're going to try to get a bigger guy that can handle a big workload. Who is that? I don't know, but I think we'll find out in the next month and a half.
I think we will find out in the next month and a half. And again, you mentioned kind of the size component that I think is what they're missing from, the Pittsburgh backfield. If you're only looking at Jaylen Warren, he doesn't offer that type of, he's a very physical runner, but like, he's not going to give you a ton of power just straight up the middle. And that's something I think they're missing. But Marcus, this running back class, especially when compared to like the 2024 class, offers so much more in terms of size and athleticism. So yeah, if you're in need and maybe you don't want to invest until round 3, I still think you're going to have some options just because this is a little bit of a deeper running back class that offers, I think, the type of running back that Pittsburgh needs.
Yeah, even if you wait till like the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, you got guys like DJ Giddens from Kansas State. You got Damian Martinez from Miami. Maybe they go out and try to get Ollie Gordon, who's kind of slipping to day 3. So going to be options for Pittsburgh. I don't think Jaylen Warren is somebody that we're recommending to go out and buy in your dynasty leagues right now while there's nobody else on this roster. So be patient.
Pop them on the block, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to react to all of the free agent news. I'm sure we're going to get multiple quarterback signings. We'll probably get some receiver news. So make sure you check back in, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on X at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.